You pay attention with so much at stake.
Seas are rising and chronic flooding will be the new normal.
You navigate, you listen, you keep an ear out. You pay attention, and so do we. We tell the stories of our time every day.
In the 26th day of testimony and on the 139th witness, Shahar Tsarnaev wept.
We unearth what would otherwise stay hidden.
There's just a lot of hate in this world, and that day, for that hour, we were humans.
Across the street.
The Red Sox have won the World Series.
And around the globe.
It's here and now.
This is
Modern Love.
This is WBUR's All Things Considered.
This is only a game.
This is On Point.
This is Radio Boston.
On air, online, on demand, and on stage in the heart of Boston.
I'm Jack Lepiars. Welcome to WBUR City Space.
Always looking forward, paying attention, and knowing that your story is one of our stories.
Good morning. I'm Bob Epps.
I'm Lisa Mullins.
I'm Meghna Chakrabarty.
I'm Jeremy Hobson.
This is 90.9 WBUR Boston.
McDonald, I program this space and it's killing me. How many people, this is your first time here? Great. Go to our website, wburcityspace.org. We've been open 4.5 months. I like to call it the 92nd Street Y of Boston. We've been doing 4 to 5 events every week. We do everything. There's no place like this in Boston. We do the author interviews. We do policy debates. We do cooking. We do moth storytelling. We do live podcasts. We do dance. We do music. We've had a coffee house opera. And tonight we have a conversation about race with the Landmark Orchestra. At the end of this evening, there'll be a slide up. We hope that you'll be able to help contribute. And most of our programs are free or nominal cost. And there'll be a slide on how to give, if you'd like to contribute to City Space to keep this exciting programming going. One note, what you hear in here, you hear outside. So sometimes if you look behind you, especially in these summer months, all of a sudden people will stop and they'll hear music or see dancing or hear the conversation, and everybody lines up on the benches and watches, and it's such a democratic cityscape, a scene for Boston. I'd like to introduce Emmett Price, who's going to be the moderator for this evening.
Thanks so much, Amy, and thank each of you for being here. This is an exciting opportunity to have a challenging conversation, and so we hope that you all will not only be engaged, but be energized. Can I say that about a conversational race, that you can be energized by it? I hope that all of us would leave here not only better than we came in, but more inspired and more committed to being agents of change. And not just in the concert world, not just in the culture and arts world, but in our own lives. And so we hope that that sets a little bit of a context for what we're doing here tonight. But I'm going to get out the way because we have some phenomenal folks who are on the way here. I am just the train director. The train is the conversation, and we have some folks who are going to lead it here. I'm going to invite to the stage Maestro Christopher Wilkins, who's the music director of Boston Landmark Orchestra. Give him some love. He's a Boston native and also the 1992 recipient of the prestigious Seaver National Endowment of the Arts Conductors Award. That's why we call him Maestro. He's a significant presence here in Boston. Great to have you. Next up is Alvy Powell Jr. Give him some love there. If you have never heard his name or heard his voice, let me assure you that you will never forget it. He's a Virginia-born bass baritone opera singer and a former member of the U.S. Army Chorus, but he is known for his performances at presidential events and for performing the role of Porgy in George Gershwin's opera Porgy and Bess. Powell also appeared at Carnegie Hall in 2008, singing the part of Joe in Showboat. So we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly. Next is Professor Todd Decker. Give him some love, will you? He is the chair of the music department at Washington University in St. Louis, also professor of musicology and American culture. He's author of 4 books, including Showboat, Performing Race in an American Musical, 2013, Oxford University Press, and Who Should Sing Old Man River, The Lives of an American Song, 2015, Oxford University Press. What a joy to have him with us. Next, Maestro David Hodgkins. He is the artistic director of Coro Allegro and has led Coro Allegro for the past 25 plus years. He is also a widely celebrated guest conductor and educator. And then for this panel, we invite, last but certainly not least, David F. Coleman. We have 2 Davids up here. David is a widely celebrated composer, choral conductor, recording artist, and educator. He's a director of choral music at Dana Hall School in Wellesley and is the director of the 225 voice choir known as Tufts University Third Day Gospel Choir. This is our panel. Let's get to it. There's a concert coming up that we certainly want to make sure that you all have on your radars and on your PDAs or your calendars on July 31. And that concert's at 7 o'clock at the DCR Hatch Memorial Shell Charles River Esplanade. And the concert will feature the One City Choir. Important to this concert is the repertoire. Composers such as William Grant Still, George Walker, Margaret Bonds, R. Nathaniel Dett, Fred O. And then we will also perform Jerome Kern's Showboat. There's a lot packed into this performance, and a lot of it has to do with the question of the conversation of race. So let's go back and maybe go back to the turn of the century, a person by the name of Antonin Leopold Dvorak, who is a Czech composer. His dates are 1841 to 1904, comes to the United States in 1892 to be the director of the National Conservatory of Music of America in New York City. Why is that important? Chris, why is that important?
Well, there was a young Canadian of African heritage who was the son of a former slave who applied to be in Dvorak's class in New York. And he wasn't advanced enough in his counterpoint and theory to get into Dvorak's class, but he was impressive enough for Dvorak to take notice. And his name was Harry Burleigh, Harry T. Burleigh, who had the most beautiful hand, the most beautiful penmanship of all the students in the National Conservatory. So Dvorak started to hire him as a copyist. Burleigh ended up copying most of the parts for the world premiere of the New World Symphony in Carnegie Hall, the last decade of the 19th century. But he also sang spirituals for Dvorak. It's the principal way that Dvorak got to know a lot of these spirituals was from Burleigh. This is shortly after the end of the Civil War, so the spirituals weren't known to most Americans by that time. The Fisk Jubilee Singers were just beginning their travels and making this incredible body of sacred songs better known throughout the world. But Dvorak incorporated some of the spirit of the spirituals into the New World Symphony, and then he later wrote a famous editorial in which he advocated that American composers should take on these great sacred melodies and form a national art out of it, as he had done with Czech folk music in his own land.
What's significant also about this conservatory is it was very specific in allowing women and people of color to be trained. And it was a very rare thing at this time. And so we have Harry Thacker, I love his middle name, Harry Thacker Burleigh, and he also became a soloist at the St. George's Episcopal Church, where a phenomenal financier named J.P. Morgan was in residence. And so that was an interesting connection to Alvy. Why would Burley be a significant voice that these folks need to remember, particularly around the notion of the arranged spiritual? Can you talk about the arranged spiritual?
Well, first of all, I grew up in a Baptist church. The name of the church is the African Baptist Church in Sheridan, Virginia, which was a very traditional Baptist church. And the spirituals that they sang, that we sang, a lot of them were passed down and made up. They weren't necessarily arranged, okay? And you did a lot of them with the stomping of your feet. You know, they'd start a beat and that kind of thing. But the importance of the arranged spirituals, I think, and I love to sing them. It's my favorite music to sing. I don't want them forgotten. Okay, and I think that's the important thing that Mr. Burley had accomplished, being a black man. And during that time, he was doing things that other blacks weren't allowed to do or thought of in that way. So to me, that's part of the importance.
I'm going to jump all the way down to David Coleman, because, Chris, you mentioned the Fisk Jubilee Singers. Fisk University, Nashville, Tennessee, around 1871, they began their first tour to travel around, really as a fundraising situation to raise money for the school. David, can you talk about the significance of not only the Fisk Jubilee Singers, but this HBCU and its backing of this repertoire?
If it were not for HBCUs, which stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities, if it weren't for those schools, it's quite possible the spirituals as we know them wouldn't be known at all. You have to remember that spirituals are born out of a folk tradition during slavery. And when the Emancipation Proclamation happened and people weren't slaves technically anymore, the songs died because people didn't want to sing spirituals because it reminded them of being a slave. If it weren't for those songs being passed down through oral tradition, grandparents passing on to their children, that were then making these schools and singing them, and educated musicians, black musicians, taking these spirituals and turning them into a formal choral setting, you have to imagine that most people had never heard spirituals or slave music if they didn't live on a plantation. So their ability to take that culture and that experience and share it with not just America, but Europe and abroad, was the first time people had ever heard anything close to these sonorities, these melodies, these texts, this experience. It truly was a vessel for carrying the black experience everywhere. Music did that, and HBCUs did that.
David, can you talk to us a little bit about the musicality of the Negro spiritual, and perhaps maybe from a musical standpoint, what do you hear? And David Hodgkins, we want to get your voice here. What that musicality is, and perhaps maybe from a conductor's perspective, what are the challenges of bringing those sonorities, those textures, those timbres, those sounds to life?
You know, that's actually a very interesting question, because there are a lot of people that think that if you are white, you can't perform spirituals. If we don't step in other people's shoes, we'll never truly understand who they are, right? So I was very fortunate when I was an undergraduate at UMass Amherst to know Horace Clarence Boyer, Dr. Horace Clarence Boyer, who was a Eastman-trained theorist, but also an amazing gospel and spiritual performer with his brother, and they toured the Deep South for many years. And so when I was in undergraduate school, we did some of those things, those pieces, and he brought a flavor to those pieces, an understanding of those pieces, the background of those pieces, and the way that people like William Dawson and Harry T. Burley arranged them, the richness of the harmonies and whatnot, it allowed you the freedom to get off of the page. you know. And that was really the most important thing, is that the music did not come from the page ever. It was just a mechanism for us to understand the historical context of the piece, and the structure of the piece, and then you could take it in all kinds of different directions. And so I was very fortunate also to work with Horace. We did a whole number of performances called The Old Ship of Zion.
Yeah.
And he, actually, I think he recorded that for PBS at some point. And the interesting thing was he often told me he wanted to actually include Coro Allegro in that group, in that PBS special, and he said, the problem is I want a choir that looks like a black choir but sounds like Coro Allegro. So we never made it into the special, but it meant a great deal to me, because what that told me was that I somehow had found a kernel of the thing that he was looking for, so I think it's a tremendously important thing that again, taking somebody else's music from whatever culture that is and trying to understand that culture through the music is of vast importance, I think.
I'm so glad that you mentioned Horace Clarence Boyd and his brother James. And Horace actually was the first African-American PhD in music theory from Eastman.
Yeah.
It was phenomenal. Context is everything is a statement that we often make, particularly in the arts and culture. So Todd, we want to get to Showboat, and we've kind of done a little bit of historical, chronology to kind of get there. But if you can mention this one rather important production called Shuffle Along. Can you mention just a little bit about the significance of that 1921?
Yeah. So the stories that you've all been telling are African Americans bringing this music to audiences, to audiences who had not heard it, but also preserving it. And Shuffle Along is a historic show from 1921 that brought this music to Broadway. So Shuffle Along played a Broadway house up on 63rd, sort of on the edge of the theater district. In 1921, it was an entirely black cast, and the creative team on the show was also entirely African American, which was extraordinary then and remains extraordinary now, right? The phenomenon of the black cast show continues in Broadway history. A couple years ago, there was a fantastic production of The Color Purple. Maybe some of you saw that. Maybe it toured to Boston. So Shuffle Along invents this kind of Broadway show where African Americans bring music that is distinctively black to the Broadway audience, which is, and has always been and remains, overwhelmingly white. So that there's a racial conversation happening there with African Americans taking the stage. Think about the stages of the Broadway theaters. These are incredibly important bits of real estate. And Shuffle Along was the first show in Midtown Manhattan where black performers and a creative team took the stage and controlled it and controlled an audience, a white audience, in a way that there really was no other. There were no other venues in the time where that large a group of white Americans would sit and listen and respond to a black voice from the stage. So these shows that we're talking about and this music was tremendously powerful. In its moment, it was one of the only places where there was this interracial conversation happening, or confrontation.
And Shuffle Along launched several important careers, including amongst its actors, including a bass baritone who becomes a central figure in our story.
Right. So Paul Robeson, I'm sure many of you have heard of Paul Robeson. He breaks into New York theater. He's in the chorus briefly of Shuffle Along, but quickly in the mid-1920s becomes the first African-American male star actor, right? So he plays in controversial plays, and he appears in theater, in spoken theater, and then he also starts giving these concerts of the music that we're talking about.
And Shuffle Along, 504 performances. 504 performers. I mean, it's record-breaking.
Which in the 20s, that I know now we think of something running for 35 years, but in the 20s, in the 1920s, to run that long was extraordinary. It's one of the top 10 longest-running shows of the decade.
Yeah, and not only Paul Robeson, but Josephine Baker, right? Adelaide Hall. I mean, just so many folks whose careers were launched by that. And so that's 1921, and then we have 1927. Showboat. This piece, the music by Joseph Kern, and the book and the lyrics by Oscar Hammerstein II, based on Edna Ferber's best-selling novel, Mississippi River Showboat, Cotton Blossom, which tells a narrative that spans 40 years from 1887 to 1927. Somebody jump in. Tell us about the significance of this piece. Like, why are we talking about Showboat? Come on.
Well, I'd love for Todd to talk a little bit about something that you call the popular music plot, which never got fully realized. Right. But it's maybe the most important reason why we're here today, in terms of Showboat.
Right. So if Shuffle Along was an entirely black cast show, most of the shows on Broadway then and now are entirely white cast shows. And what Showboat did, and it was there were some precedents for this, but Showboat did it and was successful at it, was a big hit, was it took an African-American cast and a white cast and put them into the same story, which makes it a very expensive show to do, makes it it continues to be sort of an oversized Broadway musical. But it built into the show by having a black chorus and a white chorus and black characters and white characters. And key to this, performers who appeared as African-American or who appeared as white playing these respective roles. So the show is segregated. The show segregates its characters by race. It creates this... it raises these questions we're talking about tonight, right? I think it's one of the reasons Showboat endures. It's been revived over and over again, as recently on Broadway as the 1990s. It was filmed 3 times. It was turned into 3 Hollywood films. So by putting black and white Americans into the same story and letting them, featuring them in music that was also sorted as white and as black, Showboat forces these kind of conversations. And one of the reasons that they did that, one of the reasons Kern and Hammerstein wanted to do that, is they wanted to put Paul Robeson, this African-American, he was actually a sex symbol. He was incredibly, an incredibly charismatic figure in the 20s. They wanted to put him in a big-time Broadway show. So that's how we get Old Man River, and that's how we get this show that has continued to be vibrant.
I was down in Waco, Texas a number of years ago at Baylor University going through the special collections. And they have a special collection of Jules Bledsoe. Really? And in the special collection of Jules Bledsoe is either a facsimile or a copy of the original score for Old Man River with his notation on it. And in his notation, there are just markings where he kind of talks about inflections and enunciations, whatnot here. And Jules Bledsoe was the one who premiered the song. Paul Robeson was scheduled to premiere it, but they had delayed the opening where it didn't work out with his schedule, so they brought Jules Bledsoe in to play the role of Joe. But we have someone who's played the role of Joe here. Alvy, can you talk about not just Old Man River, but just a little bit of the inside of Showboat for us?
Well...
Don't you love his voice?
Butter, man, butter.
That's all you got to say.
Well.
Barry White, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't know. I think people have different feelings, of course, about Showboat and how even the role of Joe should be performed, how much emotion can be or will be put in the song, how much movement, if I remember right, Paul Robeson sat and just sang
it,
you know. In the productions that I've done, I think I start out on a bell and I stand, but I motion, and I move. So I think it just depends on how you feel about the song, what may have happened to you in your life that you can relate to bring into the music. As far as the whole show is concerned, I think it'll always be rather controversial. And people are going to have different opinions and different thoughts about how they feel about the black chorus, the white chorus, miscegenation. Say it for me.
Miscegenation.
Thank you. You know, if it's a white woman playing a half black woman, or you know, that kind of thing. There's so many things. You know, you talk about Old Man River, and I know you didn't quite ask me this, but you started.
But please answer it.
Answer the question you wish he'd asked.
And you, sir, wrote the book "Who Should Sing Old Man River," and I thought about that, you know, because I've sung it.
You're gonna give us your answer.
No. Yes, I'm going to give you my thoughts on it. Okay. If you're singing Old Man River in the context of the show, I think people would probably want to see a black man. Okay. I'm not saying that it does have to be, but I think that's appropriate. Okay. But if you're singing the song in a concert, okay, and you decide, well, let's put myself in. I'm going to put myself in my own shoes. I had to sing Old Man River so many times at the White House for about 4 presidents, and it was requested so many times. Now, you know, in Washington, you must be. At least you used to have to be politically correct. Anyway, we won't. That's a whole different conversation. So I would not stand in front of a group of Caucasians and say and sing in a concert version or in a concert. Colored folks work on the Mississippi. I'm in a concert, I'm in a uniform. I'm not in a costume playing Joe. And so I chose to use words. There's an old man called the Mississippi. That's an old man that I'd like to be. What does he care if the world's got troubles? What does he care if the land ain't free? Don't look up, don't look down, don't dare make the rich boss frown. Instead of white man frown, okay? I'm singing in front of 99%, you know, okay? I'm in Washington, I'm at the White House, okay? And so I made those choices, and it, I think, kept everybody comfortable. Okay. And so I was asked to do it over and over again, and I'll be honest with you, it also made me rather comfortable. You know, I wasn't there to throw anything or have anybody think that I was throwing something in somebody's face. I'll tell you another story, though. I was in the Army Corps for 26 years, and then I'll stop talking.
No. What you dare.
And they tell me that before I got there, a white gentleman stood up bass to sing Old Man River, and they assigned it to him and said, okay, no problem. And, you know, he's big guy, he's about 6'4", you know, and handsome and everything. And he stands up, and at that time there were about 6 black men in the Army Corps. The Army Corps is an all-male corps, okay, and it consisted of about 28. And he stands up and he goes, "Colored folks work on the Mississippi," and one of the black men went, "Oh no. Oh no." And so he never got the opportunity to sing it. And then years later I came, you know, and I remember I auditioned with that song, okay, along with Propacatis, okay, from the Rossini Stabat Mater, you know. And I used the words that I use today, singing at the White House and everything, and it was well accepted, and I ended up singing it on every darn concert that the band and chorus had for 20-something years. As a matter of fact, I'm on YouTube singing it at my last retirement performance. It's there.
Can you tell us just briefly about some of the places and the people who have requested that you sing that song?
President Reagan, President Ford. He was not at the White House. He was not president at that time, but Reagan was. H.W. Bush, W. Bush, and you're president now. Yeah. So those are just some of the presidential folk.
David Coleman, we were talking back in the green room about appropriation and the uses of repertoire, and Alvy talked about his thoughts about who can, who should, who shouldn't. And we also talked about contextualization. Can you share a little bit for our audience about that conversation, just briefly?
I'm a choir director, which means that I'm directly involved with the intelligence behind the composition and bringing the intelligence of the performer together. Orchestra composers do this, conductors do the same thing. But I'm also a conductor of children. I work with grades 5 all the way through college and beyond. And most people don't have a clue about the music that they're singing, whether it's from Europe, or whether it's from America, whether it's from the past, or whether it's from something they heard on the radio. It is your job as an educated person, I don't care if it's in the arts or in anything, to share the knowledge that you have. And if you waste time by not talking about it, you lose so many precious opportunities. As a choir director of diverse student bodies, people from all walks of life, people from different socioeconomic economic statuses, people from different races, people from different religious backgrounds, which like my choir at Tufts, it's over 200 people every semester, and I have this opportunity to share gospel music with them in a unique way. And I don't want to waste time, and I don't want to waste their precious minds. And it doesn't take a long time. It just takes you the thought and the care to do it. And if more people, and when you go to see a concert and they have program notes, or if they have talk backs, or if you come early at 6:30, you'll hear the conductor talk about you should go to those things. You should read your programs. There's some people who do dramaturgy and people who do research on music, and they write those things. They spend a lot of time writing those things.
Yes, we do.
For good reason. In hopes that you would not come to just be entertained, and that you would actually grow and change into somebody better than when you walked in. Now, when it comes to race relations in America, there's no more important topic than that has suffered so many missed opportunities. I could use the Black History Month as an example. Black History Month was never intended to be a month. It was a week, and it was supposed to be temporary. And the reason that it's continued on is because of failed chances over and over and over again, that it's just become a tradition that we stopped thinking about. But when it comes to the opportunity to have a teachable moment, you know, what Alvy just said is true. If that white officer had sung the song with thought beforehand, he would have had the solo. Alvy had the thought to change the lyrics and present it and make it so that it's acceptable, but more importantly, people understand that he changed the lyrics.
David, can you tell your story about Memphis Symphony?
Yeah. So, I'm sorry. That wasn't for you. That was me reflecting on my childhood. Before I tell that story, I just want to say that I've had so many opportunities to tell the world about the history of gospel music, which of course is rooted in the history of this country, which is ugly. But you need to hear it so that you can appreciate it, so that you can understand it, so that we can love each other. That being said, and that's my life's work. But what Chris is referring to is when I was a child, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, right there on the Mississippi River. And every summer we had something called the Sunset Symphony. The Memphis Symphony Orchestra would perform a concert People would sit on the grass, much like our Esplanade concerts here with the Hat Show. We would have a stage right there at the setting, but we were looking at the river. So the symphony would be there, the sun would set, and you'd have the Mississippi River there. Beautiful. And the orchestra would play pops-style music for the folks. And the end of the concert, a gentleman would come out, an older black gentleman would come out, and he would sing Old Man River. It became a tradition. That in itself isn't remarkable. What became remarkable was that when he would sing the song, people would stand up and rock back and forth to the music. And when he would finish, he would leave, and they would clap and clap and clap and clap and clap and scream and woo, until he would come back out again, and they'd sing again, again, again. And he would sing it a second time. And then he would leave, woo, again, again. Third time, fourth time, from the beginning of the song to the end. Not vamping it like a gospel song. Like he would sing the entire song over and over again. Now, I'm a teenager, maybe 12 years old. And I remember it was the first time in my life I felt like really uncomfortable being black, because most of the audience was Caucasian. But I remember standing there looking around and seeing people just, the look on their faces watching this black man sing that song. And I'm like, it's not the song, and it's not his singing. Of course, his singing was great and the song is great. But it started to get to me. I was like, they like how they feel when they hear and see this man singing this song. What is happening in here? What subconsciously have we programmed ourselves to remember when they think about, oh, the good old days, and oh, this is so wonderful. And people would come to the concert just to hear that song. And the man who sang it did that for 25 years or so, a long time. And he loved it. And he was often quoted as saying, oh, this is wonderful, it brings people together. But most blacks in Memphis, and I thought I was alone, because it was, like I said, it was the first time I felt uncomfortable racially in my own city. And I was young, and I had plenty more time to learn how that would feel. But it shook me. And I stopped wanting to go to those concerts. But yet it would be covered on the news every year. Oh, and of course, James Hyder would come out and he'd sing his song. And I remember always just going, is it just me that felt like that? I found as I got older, it wasn't just me. It was a lot of people. And it became this conversation about, should you be doing that encore over and over again? Are you enjoying that? But by the fact that he consented and that he liked it, he did it. Every year he came back until finally they retired the song and he passed away a few years ago.
Wow. Wow.
But yeah.
Wow. Well, Todd, in your book, you talk about the fact that Showboat generally, but Old Man River specifically, negotiates the color line, or it forces the performer to negotiate the color line, because on the one hand, it's written for a suffering black man, somebody who's aggrieved and suffering physically and spiritually at the hands of the white community. And it's written in dialect, and it's written by a white man. Two white guys have put words and a melody in the mouth of a black performer. So it automatically raises a whole host of issues, and it's partly what your book is about. And what I love that you do is you look at it from the point of view of the performer, because it forces performers and directors to make a lot of choices.
Right, and I think the one element that perhaps weighs, if all those aspects of the song that are difficult to deal with, the element that you didn't mention there is the performer, right? And so I think of someone like Alvy saying that how you negotiated the song for yourself, in particular with particular audiences, and often that's been, I mean, every singer of the song has had to do that. I think of so that the stories and certainly these are common stories in the long history of this song. So a couple of the stories that I think that show performers or audiences taking agency over this song, because one of the great things about Old Man River is it's performers' music. It's music. It's not composers' music. You don't just have to do what exactly it says, right? The performer has some agency. So that, for instance, I think of Paul Robeson, who did not initially want to sing the song. He only sang the song he sang it on Broadway in a revival, and then he sang it first in London, and then he sang it, and his wife wrote these letters at the time that said, yeah, Paul's in Showboat, he does almost nothing, he sings Old Man River 3 or 4 times, right. Dominates the show, and we're making good money, and he has time to do what really matters for him.
Yeah.
So again and again, the performers who, or like with Robeson, he strategically used this song. He understood its power, and he understood its power, and he also, I think, sought to be comfortable singing it. And what he did over the course of about 10 years is change the lyrics, word by word, phrase by phrase, tweaking it until by about 1939, he had a version that he could sing as a protest song. Right, this song that you're saying is about a sorrowful man who will not move forward in history, who is stuck like the river. By the time Robeson's done with it, at the end of the 1930s, it's a protest song, no uncertain terms. That he sang it all over the world, and I think he saw that one of the ways to take control of this melody, because it's an incredibly powerful melody, it practically demands wild applause, right? It's a great, great show tune. One of the ways he took control of it was by changing the words. A second story where the audience participated. So Old Man River was heard on the radio a lot in the 40s and 50s. It was sung on the radio a lot. And in my research, I found this instance where Robert Merrill, a great white American baritone, a famous singer, he was singing Old Man River, and he sang it. And he sang initially the verse began using the N-word, which is something we can talk about if we want to. That was changed to darkies, which was considered at the time a less offensive word. And then it was eventually changed to colored folks. And then Here We All Work later. But Robert Merrill sang using the word darkies, and the NAACP wrote him a letter, and they said, please use colored instead. Mm-hmm. We understand you want to sing this song. Please use colored instead. And I only found out about this because Robert Merrill wrote a letter to a black newspaper and said, I got this letter from the NAACP, and they said, change this word. And he said, I'm going to do it. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for giving me some input. I'm going to change. I'm still going to sing the song, but I'm going to change the lyrics here. And I remember when I found that story, I thought, here is a moment where there's evidence for the black audience saying to a white artist, here's how you need to change this to be respectful to us. Now, granted, the conversation will be different now in terms of eliminating the word colored, but at that moment in the early 50s, to shift between those two words was progress for the black community and this white artist. He made a public spectacle of himself doing it, right? He said, I'm doing this, and here's why. So he didn't, so it was.
Let me ask a question on the same line, and we'll pause for a break shortly in the event that anyone needs to make a pit stop or grab some refreshment at the concessions. We'll pause for a short break. Porgy and Bess, Gershwin, again, composed and written by white, Caucasian writers, but suggested for an all-African or all-black cast. So in this moment of negotiating culture, negotiating what people get to say within the storyline and the narrative, what people get to sing, how they get to sing it, how do we wrestle with that as artists, as directors, as performers, as curators? How do we wrestle with that piece? Because the race and the ethnicity and the culture comes right back into it.
Well, I've done Porgy and Bess a number of times. Alvy has always been my Porgy. Last couple times we've done it, we've... Not my Porgy. I've been your conductor. Last couple times we've done it, we've brought in a gentleman whom you know, and whom you know very well, who is from the Charleston area. He's from the lowlands, low country of South Carolina, who's who sang with the Eva Jessie Chorale, who was Gershwin's choice of chorus for the premiere of Porgy and Bess. And he came in as a dialect coach. So why did the Gershwins decide that Porgy should only be sung by actors of African descent? Part of it, I think, is that Gershwin, at least from an artistic point of view, wanted it to be a verismo opera, wanted it to seem real. So in verismo, this has to be filled with water because it's a glass of water, and I should be able to drink it. And at some point in the production, I ought to drink it to prove that it's real water. Everything on some level has to have that real or believability about it. So that's a strong argument. But again, we come back to it's written by two Jewish white men. And by the way, all these shows are written by Jewish men. There's maybe something there about the Jewish tradition of assimilation, being able to be versatile enough and like a sponge, like Copeland had that ability. Leonard Bernstein had that ability. You want me to write a Puerto Rican piece? I'll write a Puerto Rican piece. So then the question, Alvy, is when you sing Porgy, and you grew up in the South, so you can bring that to it, that some Southern believability to it. Do you feel like what George Gershwin and Ira have given you, is there blackness in it? Or is it phony? Or is it somewhere between the two?
It's definitely not phony. George Gershwin went down and he did his homework.
Yeah.
He worshiped, if you will, he attended the worship services. He stood up and attempted to shout, okay? And being the great composer that he was, he captured the spirit and was able to put it on paper. I honestly believe that because when I sing Porgy, in some of the passages, the way they're written in the dialect, my father was from North Carolina, from the southern tip. And I remember some of the things, the way he used to say things. He was born in 1905. And the way he used to say things, well, they hoped me do it. I hoped him, or things like that. Or things like, yes, boss, my door opens on the coat. Things like that is so real to the way people actually spoke during that time in that region. That doesn't mean all black people spoke that way.
Yeah.
Don't get it twisted. And as far as the music is concerned, it's a genius piece.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It is, and it allows you, as a spiritual person, which I am, to bring your emotion to it. If you have the talent to do that, if you're the type of singer that can connect your soul to your voice and give it wings, Porgy and Bess allows you to do that.
Jump in when I was a composition student at Boston University. I took a graduate level composition course, and we studied two operas, Wozzeck and Porgy and Bess. And it's considered worldwide top tier compositionally. I mean, it's looking at I'd never heard Porgy and Bess all the way through, but when I saw the score laid out in front of us, we started studying it. It absolutely blew my mind.
You all know that David was the pianist for the ART production, the Gershwin's Porgy and Bess, that subsequently went to Broadway. So you got to know it pretty well.
Yes, I did.
How black is it? Does it sing with a black voice? Does it speak with a black voice?
Gershwin understood musical theater, and he understood jazz. And jazz is black, period. And he incorporated a sonority and a style of the use of bent notes and the use of certain chords that weren't found in opera before. You understand Gershwin mostly wrote theater pieces. He mostly wrote show tunes. And when he did compositions, piano concerto, when he did Rhapsody in Blue, when he did these things on a larger scale, Porgy and Bess being the biggest one, of course, he really went into all of the techniques that you would find in any European opera, including atonal music, but at the same time in the arias, in the pieces, and in the chorus work, really strong jazz music, and that by itself makes it Black. Yeah.
How do we deal with the polemic? How do we deal with the fact that in many realms, what we know as concert music is juxtaposed to what we know as jazz? What we know as opera is juxtaposed to what we know as pop music. And here you have someone like Gershwin, who clearly studied, clearly went into the churches. I will argue that he studied William Grant Still and some of the compositions that were influenced by Black folk sonorities. Gershwin studied that and was able to do it in his own pen with his own right. But how do we wrestle with that for an audience in the 21st century who has been challenged to pick either or? Like, can we, be subscribers to the Boston Landmark Orchestra and also be subscribers to Scullers Jazz Club? Can we do both? Can we do,
Hope so.
Please. Right. It's one of these educational questions where I give you the answer to, right? But can we also learn and have the palate to be able to listen to operatic singing and then also listen to pop music without having to suggest that one is higher or lower, better or less than?
Preach.
Can we wrestle with that?
I think that's what's exciting in the 21st century is that, and certainly with young people, my student, I totally identify with that, growing up in the 70s and 80s, with that sense of high and low and that sense of this is Broadway and this is opera and that. I think for young people, certainly my students, they don't understand that argument at all. The opportunity I think that opens up is for, and I know we're going to talk about this later, is for arts organizations to rethink repertoire as well, right? And to recognize audiences aren't parsing it that way. Yeah. This concert that Landmark's Orchestra is doing, I'm excited about it as a Showboat scholar because one half is Showboat and the other half is music by Black composers, from a variety of time periods that will finally put Showboat in perspective. If you go see a production of Showboat, you only hear Showboat, and there's problematic ways that Showboat presents its Black characters and the kind of this Broadway music. So that the chance to hear these juxtapositions is what I'm gonna have to miss the concert because I live in St. Louis. But I think the program just looks like an opportunity to hear things bumped up against each other that don't normally find that juxtaposition. And to do it in an intense environment, in a live environment, with a bunch of other people is when you really start to get the story, right? When you still get the experience of it with other people is what counts, I think.
David H., if you can speak into this about the variety and diversities of not only approaches and expressions, but also performances and repertoire, and talk about how we can wrestle with this. And you've been wrestling for 25 plus years with Coro Allegro, doing well.
Yes, I think I have. I just wanted to go back for just a second and talk about how could Gershwin write for the Black experience, because if you recall in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, when religion came to the slaves, they went to the Old Testament for their inspiration, not the New Testament, and they went to the Jewish, the pain of the Jewish history, and I think there is a shared pain there. And so all the spirituals are all Old Testament based.
That's correct.
And so I think there's actually a natural synergy there between how that all kind of pulled together. So I've sort of lost my train of thought for this other thing though. So but diversity in terms of just, can you refresh my
repertoire, voices, curation, programmatic pieces?
Yeah. So Coro Allegro is an LGBTQ plus organization, and I'm 27 years now, and from the beginning, it has been an organization that has tried to be as diverse as possible. As a matter of fact, my first review, the chorus was chastised because they hired a straight white man, and then they said, but it was okay because actually it worked out really well. And then I think that I'm glad they thought that, and I hope they still think that. But when we did this piece, William Grant Still, I think that's where you want me to go, right? So 20 years ago, we gave the Boston premiere of a piece by William Grant Still called "And They Lynched Him on a Tree." And it's a very, very powerful, very graphic work. And it calls for a black chorus and a white chorus. And when we did this 20 years ago, there was a tremendous, tremendous amount of soul searching whether we could actually do this piece. And so we decided that we were going to do it. And my first challenge was, what do you program with a 20-minute piece that's about lynching? And 20 years ago, it was actually much harder to do than it actually is today, right? So the answer that I finally came up with is, well, you don't focus on the lynching, you focus on William Grant Still. So we did an entire program of William Grant Still, and it really was an amazing program because he has written so much uplifting music as well. You're going to hear some, as a matter of fact, on this concert next week.
By the way, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to interrupt. William Grant Still played oboe in the pit band for Shuffle Along.
That's right.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, he was touring in Ohio with W.C. Handy.
That's right.
And that's how. And there was a gentleman that had him in a backboard, horse-drawn carriage thing, and the white driver pulled over to the side because there was a lynching, and he watched this lynching, and that's what was the inspiration to write this piece. So we did this piece 20 years ago, and we had a chorus, a black chorus from Boston that we were going to collaborate with. And about a month and a half or so before, they found out that Coro Allegro was a gay chorus, and backed out of the performance. So we were a little bit stuck, and I discovered that there was another performance down in New Haven. And so Jonathan Berryman, who formed a black chorus to perform the piece down there, and I convinced them to come up here and do the piece again with us. And we also invited Judith Still, William Grant Still's daughter, and we had a whole weekend of workshops and open rehearsals and meals and wonderful times. And so it was really quite an extraordinary experience, and it's actually a very programmatic work, almost an opera. And it's supposed to be that the white chorus starts, and they have just finished this lynching, and then they're supposed to go off stage, and then the black chorus is supposed to come on. But in fact, there's not space to do that in the places that we perform. So the only way that we could do this actually was to have the white chorus was in the back, and the black chorus was in the front. And at the beginning, the black chorus turned their back to the audience, which meant that the white chorus had to sing in the face of the black people about lynching. Mm-hmm. So I still get emotional thinking about it because it was so powerful and so dramatic, and people couldn't not cry, in the chorus during the performance. Mm-hmm. And then the white chorus turned their back to the audience. The black chorus sang, and then they come together and unify together in the end. This was a positive message at the end, but Coro has had a history of doing lots of different kinds of outreach to the Syrian community, to the Jewish community, to to people in Uganda, but it was that performance that really sort of set us on the trail of being willing to take those risks, because it is a risk. And one of the things one of the things I have to say is that I'm very fortunate that Yoshi Campbell writes all of our program notes, because I end up learning more myself than I think I impart half the time. And it's talk about preparing for concerts. We can't always have all the answers, and there are so many people that do have so much knowledge, and so I'm always gratified and interested to learn about my own concerts, to find out what I'm doing, and what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. So, so anyway, that was. I will say one last thing about this we had 20 years ago. We had. I'm going to say two more things. Dennis Scott was a black singer in Coro. And through him, what I learned was he couldn't decide whether to sing with Coro or with the other chorus. and I actually don't remember which one he sang with now, but what he talked about to me and to the group was not the racism between just the white chorus and the black chorus, but the racism within the black community, and the homophobia in the black community. And these are things that I didn't really understand and know at the time, you know. So it was an incredible journey for us. Fast forward 20 years, we did this piece again this past year in March, and we performed it with a piece that we're going to do next week. Part of the piece we're going to do next week. And we ran up against a different challenge because this time Coro is not just white. It was mostly white back then, but now it's white and Asian and the people that identify in a myriad different ways. And so there was a lot of discussion about, well, I don't really identify with the white chorus, but nor do I really identify with the black chorus. So where do I fit in, right? Where do I sing? And the conversations around that were very intense. And so finally, after a number of conversations, I did have a conversation with Jonathan Berryman, who was the conductor of this Yale chorus. It was their 20th anniversary because they had formed to sing this piece, and they stayed together for 20 years. And so I asked Jonathan about that, and he said, "Well, you know, if you weren't white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, WASP, right, WASP." In the South at that time, you were considered black. So if you were Jewish, you were considered black. If you were Catholic, you were considered black, right? If you were gay, you were considered black. And so we will take anybody that you want that wants to sing with us can feel free to do that. And that was a partial answer. It still, in some ways, didn't answer fully, but you know, it was again a very arduous journey. It proved in the end to be, I think, an incredibly enriching journey, not for just the audience, but for the chorus members themselves and the performers and the orchestra, you know, that we hire. And so, and I think that's all I'm going to say.
You shared beautifully.
That, so.
I appreciate that. We've started in the late 1900s. And now we're in the 20th century. We've covered a lot of territory. I think we deserve a little bit of a break. The restrooms are through this door. The concessions are through this door. Let's mark maybe seven minutes. And I'm told that you can bring your beverages back into this lovely room. And so why don't you do what you got to do?
About the current state of the protests in Puerto Rico. Do we expect them to continue to grow over the next days? This is On Point. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. We're talking about the protests.
All right. We are so glad that you are here. And like any performance, the true test is what happens after intermission. And I think the audience has grown since before. So you all are absolutely amazing. One of the things I want to share with you, we had a slide up earlier as the panelists were speaking, and David Hodgkins' name was missing because we made a couple of, in athletics, we call them game time decisions. In music, we call them, you know, kind of baton decisions. We made a couple of last-minute decisions, and we wanted to make sure that he was on board, so that slide will be corrected, but it will be also corrected. There we go. There we go. It will also be corrected by a voice that you all need to know, and a phenomenal woman who you need to all make sure you meet. And she is in the person of Ashley Gordon. And let me just tell you just a brief bit about her. She's a violist and the artistic and executive director of Castle of Our Skins, a concert and educational series celebrating black artistry. And she came to New England in 2006 to pursue her master's degree at New England Conservatory. And she is just taking the scene by storm, doing phenomenal work. And so what a privilege to add your voice to this conversation. We left off talking about William Grant Still, Porgy Bess, the Gershwins, and one of our audience members mentioned that we need to really contextualize the fact that many of these composers grew up together. whether in the Jewish community, whether in the African American community, many folks lived in the neighborhoods and the communities of New York City. And one of the things you understand about New York City when you dive in deeper is that folks who, and I always talked about this when I used to teach at Northeastern Music, there was a population of individuals called the B people. I don't know if you've ever heard about the B people. We've heard about black people, we have heard about Jewish people, we have heard about Caucasians, we've all been invoked in the conversation. But the B people are people who are broke. And broke people in many ways live in neighborhoods amongst each other across ethnicities, across religions, across different social, economic, political sentiments. And many times, and I'm just using the B people as an exemplar for how some of these musicians and composers and writers and poets and playwrights and painters all kind of coexisted and shared various viewpoints of a similar experience. And so when we talk about the Hammersteins and the Gershwins and we talk about the Kerns and so many people, they grew up together. They lived in the same neighborhoods. They shared experiences. They shared viewpoints. And so I think rather than talking so much about blacks and or Jews or, and talk about that, I think one of the narratives that we miss is the neighborhood community experience. And when you think about who you grew up with, and how you have seen the world similarly and or differently based on those neighborhoods. So we want to invoke that. I also want to invoke, Alvy had a reaction to David Coleman's Memphis story. And Alvy, can you just share a little bit about just the different ways that we can respond to perhaps the 5 desires for encore of this gentleman who sang in Memphis, and maybe some of the audience were thinking about the old ways, but also some of the audience may have been thinking about something differently. And can you share maybe a little experience from yours?
Well, over the years, as I said before, I've sung Old Man River so many times, and the responses that I got in many cases were older white gentlemen coming to me in tears. And I don't mean tearing up, I mean running down their face, shaking my hand, saying, "You don't know what that meant to me." And some of them would say, "That was my daddy's favorite song." Some of them would say, "You really touched me with that song." One man actually said, "I want to say, I'm sorry for my race." Actually said that to me with tears running down his eyes. So I often wondered, well, does everybody feel that way? And obviously maybe everybody does not feel that way. Maybe it does remind some people of the way things used to be. And yeah, it makes me feel good that it used to be, But the reactions that I've had, it really touched people in different ways. I remember one time, if I might elaborate, the first time that I did Showboat, the whole show was at the Harlequin Dinner Theater in Rockville, Maryland. I was much younger then. And I chose to wait tables. You could either just sing or you could wait the tables and sing. And it was a buffet, okay? And of course, catfish was on the menu, a Southern cuisine. And in the beginning, what you would do is when they sit, you would take their drink orders, okay? And you'd bring the drinks, and then the show would start, okay? So this particular night, I did that. And of course, Old Man River is close to the beginning of the piece. And so at intermission, you would go back and you would collect you get their money for the drinks that but in the beginning, I brought the drinks to this table, and there was about 8 people there. And this lady looked at me and said, "You don't stick your finger in the drinks and taste them before you bring them out, do you?" And I said, "Madam, I assure you I would never do anything like that." "Well, one never knows, And she did it in front of the whole table, And so after singing Old Man River in the intermission, I went back to collect the money for the drinks. And this lady looked up at me and said, "Young man, I am so sorry for the way I acted in the beginning. you are such a talented person, and I don't know that I've ever been so touched. Please forgive me. And she did it in front of her friends. So it's interesting how that song, this show, has brought out different reactions.
I would have still been mad. Being real.
Ash, we have to get your voice into this conversation. The League of American Orchestras defines DIE, diversity, inclusion, equity, in these terms. Diversity, you've been asked to the party. Inclusion, you've been asked to help plan the party. And equity, you help to determine whether or not the party takes place and who has the power to make decisions about it. You have been instrumental in leading the charge, not only in Boston, but around the nation, and increasingly expansively around the nation in the area of D, I, and E, relative to not only programming and curation, but also helping performers find opportunities and composers find opportunities to have their music programmed. So can you talk to us a little bit about what you see moving forward? How can we have our consciousness awoken to be a part of this movement?
Sure. I think a lot of it has to start from an integral place of integrity. So while it's very faddish, I think, now to think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and a lot of people are trying to jump on this bandwagon, if it's not from a place of integrity, it is not a genuine act of trying to be inclusive, definitely for a long term. I think what I am trying to do with the work around specifically Blackness, around specifically diversifying the classical music field, is making sure that it's not a single narrative. And so if you think of Black opera, you don't only think of Porgy and Bess, but you think of the Trilogy Opera Company in New Jersey, which has seasons and seasons worth of past, present, young voices from the African diaspora writing in a Western operatic tradition. That does not necessarily include jazz idioms and African idioms and hip hop and Black overtness, I guess, to them, but is very much part of this genre. And so in the work that I think moving forward, when we are thinking about diversity, equity, inclusion, is making sure that it is a broad and accurate representation of what we see. So the singular narrative needs to be corrected, and having a very welcomed table where it is a broad, again, representation of who is out there, being able to chime in and voice in so that it is no longer a single narrative.
David H., again, you have been leading a charge to not only produce and promote diverse voices, but to be inclusive of voices that are diverse. And how have you kind of pushed, and how do we get on board in this movement, kind of similar to Ashley?
That is a hard question, because as Ashley says, it has to come from a place of integrity and a place where you want to do it, and not just want to do it because it's the right thing to do, sort of socially the right thing to do, but it's something that you feel in your soul that it's the thing that has to happen. It's interesting that you say that, because for 25 years, Coro has been doing just this, and now everybody's doing it. So it was sort of our niche for quite a while, doing the repertoire that everybody else was not doing or was afraid to do. As a matter of fact, Don Teeters once said to me that, I'm so glad Coro is in the city, because you're the ones that are willing to do the kind of things that nobody else is willing to do. But I guess the thing that is important to me, and it has become more important, first of all, is that we've tried to take a more global view of things. We have done pieces that are not just racism here, but we did a piece by Kareem Rustam, 2 pieces by Rustam. The last one was called "Rage Against the Tyrants," about the Syrian refugee crisis. We did a piece about David Kato Chizuli, who was a Ugandan LGBTQ activist who was murdered in 2011. And we've recorded them, and we're trying to get them out into the mainstream. And that's the hard part. And you know, we have been very fortunate because we have done. I think Coro has done something like 25 or 26 premieres, world premieres in our time, in my 27 years here, and certainly a number of those have been in Boston premieres, like the William Grant Still. But it's, you know, what's hard about it is that we have been, well, what's fortunate about it is we've had amazing support from donors that will be willing to commission works and underwrite what we're doing. But we are still living on the edge. And so, you know, sometimes you have to make the decision how I would love to be able to do this new work about this thing, but, you know, I was just telling David at the break what I didn't say about the first William Grant Still performance was because we were also experiencing a really difficult financial situation. So instead of using the full orchestra, I made an arrangement for strings and piano.
Oh, wow.
Because we couldn't afford the full orchestra.
Wow.
And it was still incredibly effective. And Daryl Hollister, who was our pianist even back then, was incredible and you know, played this reduction beautifully of the winds and the brass. So I think we would love to do more, you know, and the thing that I'm really gratified about is that people are finally catching the wave of this kind of programming, and looking forward and doing contemporary music and trying to different kinds of collaborations. I mean, I think that, you know, Landmarks, we did Witness Cantata a number of years ago with Landmarks Orchestra, and they've been sort of on the forefront of sort of pushing those boundaries and you know, bringing things into schools and doing these education programs and Ashley's doing a phenomenal job with Castle of Our Skins. I mean, and so I don't know that we have a Latino Castle of Our Skins, and maybe we could use one in this city. And there may be one that I don't even know about, you know. So, but collaborations, we've done things with children's choirs, we've done things with other groups, and I will say this again, you know, the more you can be in the shoes of another person is when you really understand what they are all about, and it makes you a better person. So
it's Unitas Ensemble.
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, Unitas.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one I don't know. This is the problem. You know, you're in rehearsal and performance all the time. Sometimes you don't get out in the world.
And there's space for more. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I think there's space for more partnerships and collaborations. And you're right. The Boston Landmarks has been really a leader in that. Chris, talk to us about, when I think about this work, I think about the word courage. It takes great courage to step out and lead a trail that hasn't been cut yet. And in many ways, Boston Landmark has done some of that. And Chris, you have done some of that. So talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, feels like.
Well, you know, I guess first just a dose of reality, which is that we have a vision and we have a mission, which is community service. And it's very much about uniting the voices of our diverse communities in Boston. And then there's the reality. And the reality, too, is that we want to have 5,000 people at the Hatch Shell every week. I mean, that's important. You know, we are offering a free service. We want to see a big crowd out there. And the reality of our concert world is that people like to hear stuff they already know. So that's a recipe for not being able to do what we're trying to do. If we do the Beethoven Ninth or the Verdi Requiem, we're going to pack them in there. If we program music that people... if we hire Alvy Powell to sing anything, we will pack him in there. That's just, you know, first to say we're not there yet. We're a long way. There's a long way to go. Myron Parker Brass, who is actually chair of one of our two boards, former executive director for the arts for the Boston Public Schools, former director of education for the Boston Symphony, dear friend, fabulous performing musician. She is a soloist along with Judge Milton Wright, who's also on our board next week on July 31st on this very program, served on a panel in New Haven to advise the New Haven Public Schools about participation of students, principally of a diverse background in classical music. And I got the little booklet and I opened it up and I saw it and I said, wow, okay, Myron was on of course she was on this committee. So I asked her about it last week and she said, well, honestly, it was discouraging because we were saying the same things 25 years ago. It's the same barriers, it's the same challenges, and you know what? The statistics have barely moved. And when we talk about all this exciting stuff, we talk about injecting, gospel styles. Davis can do a wonderful thing with a Hezekiah Walker tune. Well, he didn't write it, but he recorded it. And I think we're doing some really interesting stuff with Fredo's piece, the composer of the piece that Coro Allegro is going to play. And later in the summer, we're doing a fantastic project with Castle of Our Skins around Haitian music and all of these exciting things. And that is, in a way, it's the tip of the iceberg of where we need to be. So that's just the first thing that I want to say. But what our dream is that we have projects and residencies all over the city with lots and lots of different communities, not only defined by race, but defined by economic background, defined by disabilities. And we have a really strong program already in that department. But there's so much more that we can do. What we tend to do, what our best formula, I think, is to work with people like Ashley, to work with groups that are strong and already have a foundation and an audience and an artistic profile, and create a collaboration where we do something together. So on that particular night that we're working with Castle of Our Skins, we also have a project where we're creating a dance music number with the kids from Camp Harborview. And they're working with a whole orchestra of djembes that we now own that enable them to work in West African traditions or original work and work with us. So one of the ways that we are diversifying is drawing on the resources of these different groups and trying to find ways to bring them onto our stage.
I want to invite you to join us in the conversation. We have a microphone set up over here in this aisle. If you would just make your way to the microphone, stand in line. We will promise to be as short as humanly possible with our responses, won't we? We promise that. Hey, all right.
Don't give Alvy the mic.
So that we can get as many so that we can get as many of your questions. But come on and invite yourself up to the microphone here. I know that you have so much on your mind that you want to share. I want to ask the first question just to give you some time to get to the microphone. It's over there, right there. Ashley, what do you see as some of the impediments, some of the obstacles? Chris just shared the vision and the mission for Boston Landmarks, and you shared a little bit from Castle of Our Skins, and David shared about Coro Allegro. What are some of the obstacles and some of the hindrances that we still see, that if we can help people be awakened to them, that we can kind of move past them?
Sure, yeah. I want to first commend everything that I have experienced as a violist in Landmarks and audience member first on the lawn, but very, very much inspired and always welcomed to see the kind of programming and the depth of collaboration that you're interested in doing. And I think with more organizations doing something like that, it would be a far different landscape. Too often what I have experienced is competition over collaboration. And I don't think you can really build a healthy ecosystem where we all are thriving in an artistic ecosystem if we don't understand the relationship of collaboration. And Landmarks, Coro, are exemplary organizations really doing that. Your question was what? Sorry.
What obstacles do you see out there? Hindrances, impediments?
Well, that one, first of all. I think also along the lines with Castle of Our Skins, what we're doing is very much celebrating Black artistry, Black excellence, Black culture, which are not celebration, and those things are not historically and in the media what has commonly been the narrative. So we are very much being unapologetically disruptive in the work that we're trying to do. I think if other organizations were bold to be able to do that with authenticity around race, around LGBTQIA+, around climate change, around immigration, etc. Again, it would be a far different landscape. I also think with embedding it into your mission as an organization, so that when you do have a change of guards with higher up administration, that the integral qualities that you have built generations don't get lost. And to counter the cyclical nature of, we've had this conversation 25 years ago. Are we composers? Are we Black composers? Are we still talking about this? Generations and generations. Certainly here in Boston, Florence Price, who is just now becoming discovered when she was discovered in the 70s and discovered before. Why is it cyclical? I think if we can have systemic changes now, hopefully those waves will become ripples, will become a still lake.
That's helpful. Yes.
So my question, I'm not sure this is on.
There you go.
Yep. Okay. My question gets back to the title of the panel, and that is, there's a famous, some might say infamous, recording of Frank Sinatra singing "Old Man River" in front of a Ziegfeld Follies-like set. And so I'd love everyone, particularly your, Todd, but other people's reaction to that as an artifact of American popular culture.
Beautiful question.
So Sinatra sang the song for 50 years, right? And I think one of the ways that Old Man River is interesting is that we still want to hear it, and yet previous generations of audiences and performers responded to it in different ways than we do. And what they thought was a good idea at the time. Clearly for us, we look at it now and we think, what were they thinking? I think one of the amazing things about Sinatra's use of that song is that he used it to try to convince his audience he starts singing it in the in the early 1940s. He starts singing it very much, by my reading of his story at least, he starts singing it to convince his listeners that he's a man. Prior to singing Old Man River, he was a singer for girls, for Bobby Soxers, right? Who and he was like a lot of young singers like him in history, Elvis, Justin Bieber, all these people, right? When they first appear, they're attractive to young girls.
What a list!
Well, they are all in of a kind. But when they first appear, they appeal to young girls, and the aesthetic response of young girls is dismissed, right? This person can't possibly be good. Only young girls like him, right? Which is a problematic history of its own. We could do a different panel on that. But all of these singers, and Sinatra used Old Man River, a song associated with powerful Black basses. He used that song very strategically to make an argument that he was a real singer, to make an argument that he wasn't just a singer for kids, that this was a real voice, that he does things to the song that sort of he puts in brackets, like, look how long I can hold my breath for, or how long I can sustain this note, right? He makes these changes, and actually a lot of the changes he makes are modeled on how Al Jolson sang Old Man River, for those of you who know who Al Jolson is. So it's an interesting story about masculinity, I think, that there comes a moment when white performers like Sinatra and other white operatic baritones use this song that was the signature song of Paul Robeson, this incredibly powerful presence in American culture. They use it to make an argument for their own masculinity and their own strength as men. One of the real problems with that is that when they're doing this, Paul Robeson has been blacklisted, and his passport's been taken away. He's been taken off the air. He's effectively silenced for the last 10 years of his performing life, like 48 to 58. He is silenced, so that you can't, I think, watch that Sinatra, that incredibly expensive performance by Sinatra in this MGM film, and not also register the silencing of Robeson and the silencing of a powerful black voice who had turned Old Man River into a protest song. Right. So he made the song a dangerous instrument that had to be silenced.
Right. And Sinatra's singing of it almost becomes an exemplar of patriotism.
Oh, yes.
In that sense where Robeson is seen as treasonous.
Right. And as critique, right? Robeson singing it as critique.
Yeah. Hi.
This is a fascinating panel. Thank you very much. How would you rate the staffing choices of Hamilton? Is that an anomaly, or is that a step in the right direction?
David Coleman.
I
hope there's differing opinions.
A serious beef with. I don't have a beef. I have a beef with the world. The way the world works, and it's exactly what we're talking about here. It's layers of problems. Lin-Manuel had a beautiful vision of creating a dramatic theatrical work that would allow brown people to have agency and become part of the American story, become part of the American promise, become part of the American dream. And to have them do that was brilliant. But the very people that he seeks to empower and enlighten can't afford a ticket to see it. So the only people who have the ability to see this work are mostly white people who go to see Broadway theater anyway and may have the extra, almost $1,000 per ticket to be able to enjoy the piece. And so while it's being heralded as this great piece and it's all this great work, who gets to actually see it? That's a problem. And I know that Lin-Manuel had no idea that that his piece would manifest itself in that way to blow up those kinds of problems on such a world stage. That being said, I have no problem, if that's what your question is, with the cast only being non-white. Almost every show on Broadway in its history is about white people. The characters are white people. And even Hamilton is a show about white people. That fact that he allowed black and brown people to play those characters, and if people got upset about that, it says more about them than it does about Hamilton.
Chris, you had something.
Well, Todd has a lot.
Yeah, Todd.
Yeah, so I'm a musical theater historian who mainly works on race. So Hamilton is, but my difficulty with Hamilton, my main difficulty with it, is the cultural power it's going to have on this generation of young people. So I think we all have, and this is great to be in Boston telling this story, but we all have a moment in our lives when we meet the founding fathers. Right, and mothers, but let's face it, it's the founding fathers. When we meet them and we sort of understand our country through some popular culture representation of the founding fathers. And for me, that was the miniseries Roots. That's how I came to understand that and the bicentennial, right, which late 70s. But really Roots, where you have to deal with the worst of our history and with these racial histories that, with just the racist foundation of this country. You have to deal with it when you watch Roots. And when that's the thing that forms you, I worry that a generation of young people who meet the founding fathers as these incredibly hip people of color on a Broadway stage. and there's moments in Hamilton that just deeply offend me. Like when the whole thing about George Washington's going home, I'm like, where are we going to be reminded that George Washington's home is a plantation, is a slave plantation where his slaves were not freed after he died, right? I mean, those are things that Hamilton doesn't teach you in the midst of making the founding fathers, and especially, someone like Jefferson just appear to be, they have all this hipness. Yeah. And I guess the thing that scares me, that I'll add, is eventually Hamilton is going to be performed by high schools.
Yeah.
The profit motive, I mean, come on, it's going to be, before then it'll be performed by junior high kids.
Well,
right?
the property value in St. Croix, U.S. Virgin Islands, has gone sky high as a result of Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
Because now all of a sudden people can trace his lineage to St. Croix when people didn't know that before.
So when we go and see an all-white junior high do a production of Hamilton, and these kids are up there rapping and performing in a black style, in a powerful black style, but it's young white kids. Yeah. I guess when that moment comes, then I'm just concerned about how generations of white audiences, that's the audience for the show, are going to understand the Founding Fathers, just from my own experience understanding it through a cultural product that had the same sort of power. I think Roots and Hamilton,
I think that's where some program notes could be come in handy. Hamilton
You're
is
so
not
optimistic about people.
Hamilton is not a history book.
That's right.
It is dramatization, and even though George Washington wasn't given that label, Thomas Jefferson was.
Yeah.
And slavery is mentioned multiple times in Hamilton, and the hypocrisy of people talking about freedom while owning slaves. So it is addressed, but it's not accurate.
No. Yeah. Let's squeeze another question.
I just want to lift up the level of trust and respect and risk that each of you have been willing to take in various ways with your subject matter. It's pretty obvious you don't all agree on certain things. It's pretty obvious that some things are being held below the surface for another time. At the same time, you have been a model for me about how people discuss and take a topic deeper. I'm wondering how you fantasize about how us, as an audience at the moment, can be more of an audience and model and carry forward what you hope will happen because of this subject matter.
It's a beautiful question. Maybe you start with David Hodgkins, maybe.
Gee, thanks. Thank you for that question, actually. One of the things that we have struggled with Coro is that sometimes we'll do a program and we will do outreach to a certain community, and then we can't get that community to come to a different concert. So we did the Russian, the Rachmaninoff St. John Chrysostom last spring. We did a Rachmaninoff a few years ago, but to get the Russian community to come to a William Grant Still performance has been almost impossible for us. And so what I would suggest is, first of all, to be what part of Coro's mission is to be ambassadors for the LGBTQ community as people of a diverse backgrounds, and to spread that word that there are all these other amazing things. So the best thing I would say is to take a risk, to go out and I've never been to a jazz club, so I'm going to go try to go into a jazz club. Or I've never been to I have. Yes, I love jazz clubs. I mean, my undergraduate days were well, we won't go down that road. but if you have never been to a Castle of Our Skins performance, go to that. If you have never been to a Coro Allegro performance, go to that. If you've never heard David's gospel group, go to that. But not only that, bring your friends. Let's go try this thing. Let's go try. And I think that somebody said courage earlier in the evening, and I don't see myself as courageous, although some people would say I am. Coro Allegro just won the Adventurous Programming Award from Chorus America.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
But the irony is it's underwritten by ASCAP, and it's only for the music of the last 25 years it's considered. So if you've done music from the last 25 years that's really milquetoast, you can still win this award. Which doesn't make any sense to me at all. But so I think taking that risk, bringing your friends, put yourself outside of your comfort zone.
Ashley, can you speak to this question as well as our next questioner comes up to the microphone?
I think David had a really eloquent answer, and to that I would add, as part of our mission, is fostering cultural curiosity, and I think that really resonates in this context as well. Historians, thought leaders, artistic organizations that in Boston is a really dense area, but you have quality arts in theater, you have quality arts in music, you have quality arts in visual and dance and performance and things like that to be able to engage with, and bring your friends, come early, read the program notes, engage. There's there's a wealth of information being presented in beautifully different ways, kind of kaleidoscopic ways that I think can help reinforce each other. So however you want to intake and sort of ingest your information, do so with an osmosis kind of a mindset.
Could I add just one more thing to that?
Yep.
When you do that, when you take the risks and you go into all these different things, you start finding the commonalities.
Right.
You start finding the things that actually work together. You find, somebody asked why should at a young school, somebody said, why should I know Beethoven? I'm from the inner city of Philadelphia. Why should I know Beethoven? And so, you find those things in jazz, or you find those things, and you make this piece by Coltrane is Beethoven here, or some rhythmic aspect of things, and that's when life becomes interesting.
Absolutely. Yes.
I want to thank you so much for this evening. It's just been amazing, and I hope we can do this. You can do this again for us. I'm full of emotion. I wanted to say that I sing with cantata singers, and in the mid-'90s, we did Kim's slavery documents and then T.J. Anderson's slavery documents. And we had many, many sessions where we sat and talked about the texts and how difficult it was for many of us to sing some of these things. Some people understanding them, some people not understanding them, but having a dialogue. I have a beef as well. Those are what we would consider concert music. Bob Honeysucker, who's our dear friend to all of us.
Absolutely.
We miss
Also
him.
from Memphis.
We all, and we miss him terribly, all of us. He was often asked to sing, as many black singers are, let's give us some spirituals. We would have concert programs. He did a lot of fundraisers for my series and for others. And, he would do them gladly, but, they wanted to do some serious leader and that sort of thing. And I think that we need to give both sides, not just, Porgy and Bess is absolutely world's greatest, but we need to have these singers and these musicians and the composers that we consider modern classical music out there. It's not just the spirituals and such. We need to hear the Grant Stills and the T.J. Andersons and the other wonderful black composers that are about. So thank you for this evening.
Thank you.
May I?
Alvy, please.
If I might speak to that. Listen, everybody here is not going to agree with what I'm about to say.
I disagree.
And that's okay. That's all right. But here's where I am. I'm a classically trained singer, what most people call an opera singer, okay? And the door has not been opened to black people in the classics. Yes, a few of us get in. But listen, here's where I am. If it takes letting whomever want to sing whatever, regardless of their race, in order that black people get an opportunity to be looked at and said, listen, let me ask you this. I digress. How many times have you gone to an opera or a show or a play, and the person comes out on stage and you go, well, that just doesn't look like the right person for that character, But the person was so good at what they did, you forgot all about that. That's theater. That can be opera. That can be musical. You see what I'm saying? And so I'm willing to forego. Let whomever sing what the hell they want to sing if it gives black people an opportunity to have an equal chance to sing opera and be looked at as that's a character, that person is putting it there. That's what I have to say.
I think it's that sense of hope that concludes this night. Give some love for David Coleman, David Hodgkins, Todd Decker, Alvy Powell, Ashley Gordon, Christopher Wilkins,
and our moderator, Emmett Price. Thank you, buddy. To all my dear colleagues, thank you so much.
Before we
for joining
conclude, I'd like to bring up our fearless leader, our executive director of the Boston Landmarks Orchestra, Joe Francis Meyer.
Thank you, everybody. If you'll bear with me, I do have some thank yous to express, and they tell a little bit of a story, I think. First, I want to thank our music director, Christopher Wilkins. I've been the executive director of Boston Landmarks Orchestra since 2015. This will be my 5th season. And to the points of courage and integrity that I heard Ashley talk about and so many of the panelists, from the very beginning, I knew that Chris's programming was marked by deep integrity and comes from a place in his heart that is hardly contrived. It's not an add-on. Our collaborations are meaningful, and they come from a place of Chris's heart that is just extraordinary. So you lead us all, and it's incredible. So when Chris wanted to do this program, including Showboat, that brings me to thanking Todd Decker being on the stage. It's amazing to me that you're here with us. Back in January, Arthur and Chris and I all read your book, and we realized the controversial little nest that we were stepping into, and I was afraid to just say, yeah, let's do this. So I went to our board, and that brings me to thanking our board of trustees, many of whom are in this room tonight. I wanted our board to buy into this and approve it and understand it, and we would only do it in a way that included this educational component and this opportunity for our community to explore what it means. And then that brings me to thanking everybody else on this stage, Emmett and Ashley and Alvy and David and David. You guys didn't all spring out of our heads as the perfect panel. It happened little bit by little bit as we were guided by Milton Wright and Myron Parker Brass, and we put together a kitchen cabinet. And little by little, we relied on all of you to guide us and give us the courage that we needed to do this program. And to see you all sitting here tonight feels like a miracle. That you're all available on Tuesday night, July 23rd, a week before our concert. I never dreamed that this would happen. I did dream that it would happen. So thank you. Thank you to everybody in this room for being here. I hope you'll join us for all of our concerts. Tomorrow night, we present the Longwood Symphony Orchestra. Next week, of course, is Deep River. And I thank our friends at WBUR. Amy, are you still here? Wow, thank you for staying. And your team has been amazing in helping us put this together. I love this space. I think you all love this space. And again, when we talked about this community conversation, where would it happen? This is just the perfect place, and I couldn't believe it was even available. So it's just a joy and an honor to be with all of you. What an amazing night. What an amazing program. Thank you.
Judges tomorrow. Suffolk County District Attorney Rachel Rollins says the first case, 2 former executives of the Boston Center for Adult Education, along with the partner of one of the executives, are accused of embezzling almost $1.5 million.